By the way, quick view of where I'm sitting. Maybe you can see the ships in the background on the Oslo fjord. This is called the summer cabin by the coast near Oslo. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a skeptical view of Agile, and I'm going to talk about the main thing that Agile should be about, but only says the nice sounding words and doesn't do much about it, delivering values to stakeholders. Okay, and if you want a copy of the slides, here's a QR, here's the Dropbox, take a photograph, and if you're really a curious person, you're going to want the slides. They're extremely detailed, and they contain a lot of links to free books and things like that. Okay. Here, by the way, I took an overview of the slides. You can see how busy they are. Now, that's because I want to give you a lot of information, but thankfully, I'm not going to run through every line on every slide. I'm actually going to take a sample, 1 in 10, on the slide to give you a feel for it, and then I'm going to move on. So forgive me, but if you're interested, you'll go back and figure it out. I held this talk originally for the Business Agile meetup, BAM, in San Francisco and Berlin, and I thought that they were unnecessarily unnecessarily narrow when they said they used the term agile, business agile. And so the question is that the main thing about business to be agile? So just for fun, I got myself a list of all those other things like creativity and optimism and foresight and aggressiveness, that must be American, that people value. These are different values in business, and suggested that maybe business attributes, the whole thing here, is what we should be talking about in the business, formerly called Agile, now called attributes, meetup. So the thing that's always worried me about Agile is it titles the whole discipline with a means to an end. You know, we're going to do an Agile process. I think it's time to retitle it. Something like value improvement is one of my favorite, or value delivery, and say that's the whole point. And if Agile helps us deliver more value more quickly, that's good Agile. If Agile gets in the way of doing that for any reason, dump Agile. Agile is not primary. The primary thing is doing good things for our clients and employers. Okay, so we have the Einstein quote, I'm sure you've all heard, but perfection of means and confusion of aims seems to be our problem. In other words, the means is agile, and our aim is delivering value. And apparently it's an old problem. Einstein died in the early 50s, and I think we still have that problem today. Okay. Here's another old friend of mine. I used to take him to the ballet in London, believe it or not, and he thought that was good fun, as I did. And Dr. W. Edwards Deming, and he was very clear about the aim of the system must be clear to everyone in the system. I'm going to talk about clarity of purpose, clarity of aim, and the aim that you have can also be called a value judgment. So he's using that term, and the point is not to get richer, not to beat the competition, but to make life better for everyone. I call that balance and harmony rather than maximizing things. Anyway, words from the wise Dr. Deming. I think he died about, was it 1993 or 4? And I used to date him in the 80s in London. So, okay. So again, here we have I think a genuine photograph of the people who signed the Agile Manifesto. my own skeptical view of the whole Agile Manifesto, which has become sort of a Bible or religion for many, is in this link here. I like some of it, but I think most of it could have been done better with hindsight, as usual. And the problem there was all these guys, and I know most of them personally, are coders at heart. They're not value deliverers at heart. They're code deliverers at heart. And that shows up in many of the agile methods where the centricity is about, generating code in sprints, and everything else in the system is more or less ignored. And I think that's part of the problem with Agile. So after 20 or so years of Agile, I want to get Peggy Lee to sing. I won't plug it, but you can press the button here and hear Peggy Lee sing, "Is That All There Was?" Something like that. And what we got is 6 times faster buggy code, and business hasn't gotten any better with Agile and is giving it up. Okay. I went on a search on the internet with papers from discussing Scrum and Agile, and I found a few papers. And then, as usual, I found words, but very few numbers about how good it was. That's a dead giveaway. When you're not bragging about the numbers and just doing words, you're hiding something, like the fact that you don't know how to give good results, or you have no good results. So that's my danger sign. And this, goes on and on. Here's another quotation. Greta Thunberg calls it the blah, blah, blah of the politicians about the environment. But this is the blah, blah, blah about Agile. And I don't think long strings of undefined, ambiguous words are very helpful at all. I actually got my AI tool to measure the percentage of unintelligible and therefore untrustworthy words in the papers, and it was like 77% of all the words were unintelligibly ambiguous. Little bit of computations here that just shows that nobody can possibly understand it. The probability of understanding a series of just 240 ambiguous words is approaching zero, like deciphering the hieroglyphics from scratch in 1 hour or something like that. So I guess nobody really understands Agile, no matter how many certificates they take and courses they take and books they read. And we have been failing. There seems to be a growing understanding, not to mention lack of employment amongst the people with Agile certificates. So I desperately asked for citations of real solid case studies that give measurable business results as a direct result of using Agile or Scrum. I'll save you from the pain. The answer was no, not really. Okay. And aside from this particular search, my relentless contact with the community, like going to many meetups every week, tells me that people don't have the data to back up. Again, Deming's famous for having said something about we trust in God, all others should bring data. But here's another one of his clarification of values statements. Okay, and here's the ballet that he and I so enjoyed together. So, what does this values word actually mean? Now, I'm afraid that without me telling you my definition, and here it is, many of you would think it was something to do with money or finances. That's natural. We talk about value that way. But I don't mean that. I mean things that stakeholders value. And there are many stakeholders in any big project. There are 10 to 100 stakeholders, and they all have one or more values. Now, some of those stakeholders are critical. they have the power to shut you down, like the European Union, if you don't follow their privacy laws for IT systems. Um, some of them have values that if you don't satisfy them, like keep data confidential in the IT system, don't let hackers get in, then they will shut you down. Okay. So I think the beginning is to start with stakeholders in order to understand who are the powerful ones that are in fact a threat to our success or existence, and then take a look at their values and then ask a very simple question. If we don't satisfy their values, will they shut us down or give us an 800 million billion dollar fine, as they did to Apple and Google recently? And if the answer to that is yes, then these values are critical, and we have to articulate them clearly and quantitatively, measurably, and we have to design and deliver them and make sure they stay in the system. Otherwise, there's a risk that our system lifetime is limited. Okay, so anyway, so here's the rather long-winded definition of values, but it's really just about what the stakeholders believe they want and expect from us, and they will, if they're powerful enough, punish us if we don't give them. If you haven't read this book, How Big Things Get Done, that Bent the Dane from Cambridge wrote, he has a database of 16,000 projects, many of them IT, many of them not. They're like, skyscrapers. He says that the criteria of a successful project is on time, under budget, and delivers the benefits or values expected, 99.5% of all his 16,000 projects fail. Isn't that interesting? Wonder why. Well, there's some answers in the book, but those who are the 0.5% who succeed on all three counts are very rigorous and do very hard work to get it done. And nothing as simple as using Scrum or something gets mentioned in that context. Okay. So here we have celebrating the Second World War. Some of you recognize this: overtime, over budget, under benefits, over and over again. I think they said that about the Yanks in some context. Okay, now Friedberg, or Bent, I'll call him, makes the point: it's the benefits, stupid. In other words, the big thing that we need to focus on is this little baby here, which only 8.5%, sorry, I won't calculate here, but that we need to focus on the primary purpose of any project or endeavor, and that is delivering the benefits. I mean, it's all very nice if it's done on time, all very nice if it's done under budget, but if you get it done on time, under budget, and don't deliver the benefits, you failed too. Okay, so delivering the benefits is the main purpose and key. And these other things, well, we might tolerate a little bit late if it's really good, and we might tolerate a little bit over budget if it's really good, but we don't tolerate not getting the benefits we expected. So lots of interesting text there. Okay, we need to focus on the benefits, on the values, and not focus on some form of agility. Okay, there's a lot of agile-like things that Bent talks about, doing cycles of refinement, sort of like Dyson did on his vacuum cleaners in Britain, wasn't it? 28,000 prototypes before he made a successful vacuum cleaner. Something like that is what Bent's talking about. Now I'm going to shift to criticism of Agile, to tooting my own horn a little bit about my methods. My methods are a planning language known as Planguage, and a cycle of an agile cycle. In fact, the original ancient agile cycle before the term agile was concocted to describe it, and I call that evo, or evolutionary. which can stand for early value optimization. And I've also been a fan of engineering methods as opposed to crafts. And I think a lot of programming and Scrum is really a craft. And crafts are fine in their place for the smaller scale of project. But when you're trying to manage rather large things like the national health system in Britain, you need to go up a tick, and we need to talk about engineering. Okay. Now, many people talk about software engineering and they just mean coding. They don't really mean engineering. I mean engineering, and I have a definition of it, and it's quite like what real engineers and systems engineers do. So here is the Evo. There's a book on it I've just written. If you like, it's a very advanced Agile as it should have been. Here's my little sprint cycle, which has a lot of engineering in it. Okay. And you can read about that in detail, get the free book there. And if you practice it and you succeed, tell everybody. And if it doesn't work, you couldn't possibly have done it, according to the book. I've been messing around with this a long time. When I was young, I did my first consultancy on a small invoicing project in Oslo, and I delivered it in 20 steps. Each step gave value to my client. Each step removed a little part of the old system and put something new in its place. And all 20 steps, we had a fully new system. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was practicing Agile as it should be. I did notice that I didn't get problems because I took small steps and made sure they worked. And the whole was so successful that I decided as a youth I would continue doing these cycles, and I called them evolutionary. I even put them in my 1976 book, 16 years later, and basically described as Agile as it should be in this lovely sentence here. A complex system will be, like the National Health Service, will be most successful if it's implemented in small steps. And if each step has a clear measure, enter the engineering, of successful achievement, as well as a retreat possibility to a previous successful step of failure. I'm quite proud of having printed that in 1976 in the Software Metrics book and later in other books. What's this? Well, this is an early Mac, and I'm having fun with the graphics, but I also am graphically describing evolutionary steps of learning and getting better and delivering value and things like that. So that there are some principles of evolutionary delivery from my competitive engineering book, which you can have a free digital copy of. The publisher will charge you for the paper if you insist. But by the way, when you see something in square brackets with this in here, it means in the back of the slides, there are lots of references, like one to CE, and the download URL, free download, is right there. And I'm just going to cite one principle. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. In other words, your next delivery step should give you the best result you can get. And I define best result as the highest degree of value at the lowest cost. That's also known as efficiency or profitability. And this idea doesn't appear in too much of the literature. Prioritizing things by values and costs is what it's called. Hope you like the other principles when you get time to read them. Here's the Evo cycle, and here's an explanation of it. But main thing is we should normally start with stakeholder analysis, not the customer, not the user. They're stakeholders, but there's, 10 or 20 or 50 other ones, like the European Union law, maybe some British law, depending on who you are. And we have to understand who they are, how powerful they are, and what values they expect. And from that, we derive a set of critical values, maybe starting with the top 10 most critical ones to not get overwhelmed, because surely there are 100 in any large system like the NHS. And then from the values, these multiple dimensions of good things, qualities not least, uh, maybe 90% of all the values could be called qualities of the system: security, usability, maintainability, that kind of thing. And then we bring out the enterprise architect or a systems engineer, and we design solutions to fit maybe 10 different quantified value levels and 5 different quantified resources, time, people, money, simultaneously. That's when the engineering starts, when you have 15 different quantified things, and we have to look at each and every solution and say, how well does it fit? You need a thing I call an impact estimation table. Okay, and then we go around, deliver, measure, learn, and this cycle is eternal for the life of the system. But that's it. That's the whole method in a nutshell. Um, Now, one of the key ideas in engineering and one of the key ideas in my methods is that every time we do a sprint, we don't just say, it's done, here you are, there are no bugs. We measure the degree of expected value, and we measure the degree of costs. And if there's too big a deviation from good things, we learn, we figure out root cause, what we did wrong, and we try again until we get it right. We don't continue building the gigantic 8-year health system and then let it fail at the end, as many countries, Norway and Britain among them, have in fact done. Thing about measurement, a lot of people get all hung up on it. Important to realize that you don't need, Nobel Prize accuracy. You need a numeric signal saying it probably moved up numerically, so we're on the right track, and it probably moved up the right order of magnitude. So in other words, simple. I have one client who on a weekly cycle basis said, we'll never use more than 30 minutes in the week to do the measurements. So they constrained it and said, we're going to keep it simple. And there are more principles of measurement in Evo, but the rest are for you to read. Another idea that I've been practiced since 1960, and I've discovered not everybody thinks that way, is that we evolve using the existing system, the existing organization, the existing products, the existing services, no matter how bad they are. Now, there's a very strong tendency for some to want to build a new system from scratch and then, replace the old system with it. You will have noticed this waterfall method doesn't work very well, one of the excuses for doing Agile. But the point is, you don't do Agile to build the new system and then swap it out 5 years later. You do Agile to the old system and gradually prove, validate your hypothesis that these solutions actually work as advertised. And a lot of people have problems with this, and they'll explain why they cannot possibly do anything to the old system. It's too difficult. And I found that all of these excuses are actually invalid: lack of imagination, lack of training, lack of logic. And I can usually prove anybody wrong. We cannot use the old system in 5 minutes, which I've done so a number of times in my career. But I guess you have to learn how to do that. Okay, but there's some insight into it here. So stakeholder values first. Here's the penta. This was in reaction to the iron triangle, which a friend of mine, Al Shalloway, and I dislike with a vengeance. And we decided to do something better. So we got a penta rather than a triangle. And we brought in ideas that are not in the iron triangle, like, Scope is in there, of course, and then cost and time, usually. But we brought in the idea of values, the idea of designs which give the values, the idea of efficiency, which is values over resources. And resources are stand in for the old cost and things like that. And I think this is a much better, healthier model of what I'm talking about than the iron triangle, which I think misleads people. But things like people like the Project Management Institute teach it to this day, and I'm sure others do too. So there's a lot of false, in my opinion, teachings. I've written about it in the paper here. Okay. Now, another thing the cycle does, if it's short, I remember walking up to Dr. Deming when I, in 83, took his 1 week course on statistical process control in London, and he had his plan, do, study, act cycle. And this is an engineering variation we've developed of the plan, do, study, act cycle. And I asked him one question. I said, does it matter where you start in the cycle? And he said, no. It's quite correct. And does the cycle ever end? And he said, no, not as long as you're still manufacturing cars or whatever you're doing. So that's interesting. Is there an interesting point to start? Well, starting with stakeholders is, generally speaking, a good place to start, but it doesn't really matter because you're going to end up there soon enough. If the cycle is a waterfall cycle, 4 years, then it matters very much. It's very critical where you start. And there's an idea of an end in a project at the end of the waterfall cycle. But if the cycle is rapid, say 1 week or 1 day, then it really doesn't matter because within a week or a day, you're going to end up going through everything. So we got to get rid of the idea of work cycles and tasks as fairly subordinate, and say that this is a cycle of delivering value that happens to do some work along the way. Okay. Next slide. Okay. Pivoting, the term we use when we learn that things are not working, the strategies, the solutions are not working, we're not getting the values we expected, it costs too much. And in the cycle, this area here is where we learn that we need radical change, like throw away the strategies or architecture that aren't working, and maybe start reanalyzing stakeholders and their values, finding other solutions, and then here we deliver the ideas. Okay. Requirements. Here's my map of requirements from the free competitive engineering book in the glossary. It's amazing how many people in the Agile culture, if you mumble requirements, they say, oh yeah, user stories or something like that. That's it. That's all they've got, and that's all they do. I think if you're going to be an engineer and you're going to engineer really large systems and get paid a lot of money for doing it, right? Then you need to go more deeply into the idea of a requirement. And here, this breakdown, all well defined in the glossary, gives you some idea of it. Here, by the way, is a quality requirement. Okay. And here are value requirements. They're called performance requirements in systems engineering. And then there are all these other requirements that I don't have time to talk about, but they're all talked about thoroughly in the free competitive engineering book if you want to go more deeply into requirements than, say, an agile culture does. Now, stopping, there's a famous discussion of definition of done in Scrum and things like that. But sometimes you have to stop because you cannot continue. You've run out of funds totally, or there is no viable design. So now I believe that if you have very many small iterations, let's say in the first year you have 50 weekly in iterations, then I believe that means, and my own experience with my own clients, which is documented in many of the books, means that large failures are impossible. You can't go 4 years and declare the health system to be project to be totally wasted, start again. What you can get is a small failure, 1 week, one cycle, but then you fix things. And when you succeed in increasing the value, you ratchet it in, and then you keep on increasing the value. So all that, and then maybe step 20, you have a hiccup and you have a small failure for a week, but then you learn and recover. So I believe this is the key to not having the failures that happen in waterfall models and in agile, where you don't have measurement and learning and changing the design, which unfortunately is the vast majority of the popular agile techniques. I've told you about stakeholders. Now, if you'd like to go pick up my free book on stakeholder engineering, you'll find in depth about it. I was just looking through it last night. I made an outrageous claim to a friend of mine that every page contains 10 interesting ideas. And I got to about page 76, and there were still 10 ideas on every page. If you think I'm joking, download the book and take a look. It's only for big boys and girls. Okay, if you want to oversimplify and fail, you have no need for such literature. But we've got to recognize that critical stakeholders alone can kill your whole project, no matter how well you code and how few bugs you have in your code. Okay. Here is using Perplexity, my good friend, and getting it to generate stakeholders. A lot of, people are so stuck with users and customers, they don't even talk about stakeholders. And if they talk about it, they don't do it very well. But one way of getting a quick picture about your stakeholders is to tell them, what are you doing? Here's UK medical assistance to unemployed. And please generate me a good list of stakeholders. Oh, by the way, would you please tell me about their critical values? We get, we're not after the stakeholders as such, we're after the values. Okay. But we go via the stakeholders. We do have to understand the stakeholder power, their clout to fine you, to shut you out of a market. That's important. But after that, we have to understand what values would cause them to do it, and we have to make sure we don't fail on those values. So you can quickly experiment with your favorite AI system, asking it to give stakeholders, and here's the prompt right here for this. Okay. This is just an enlargement of the previous one. Okay, so here, critical value for the healthcare providers, and we're off and running. I then used my friend to say, okay, for this medical product company we're working with, would you please give me 20 most useful qualities, okay, or values? And I leave it up to them to figure out what is most useful. But if you want to direct it and define most useful, you can do it. And if you want to ask what it thought most useful meant, you can ask and it will tell you. But I said, by the way, would you, in my planning language, which of course the AI systems understand better than any of us do, please structure these not with nice sounding words, as in user stories, I want safety because I'm the safety director, or something like that. But summarize the bullshit management language so they understand it and don't just have the tag. But define a scale of measure. There are many possibilities for any one scale of measure, but pick one that sounds good, change it when you learn about something better. But you've now defined this in measurable terms. That allows you to have test processes. I call them meters here, but they are ways of deciding where we are on this scale. Okay. And then define a tolerable level. This is the worst acceptable case. Like Below this will get you in trouble with the stakeholder, and they'll impose a fine and stop your system, shut you out of the market, won't buy your product. So this is pretty important, and therefore it should be numeric and it should be clear. Okay, and people don't do this at all. They don't even have the what I call a constraint level, and they now once you've survived this test, you're tolerable or above. The next thing we need is success, and I call that the goal level. And I'm simplifying a bit here, but the goal level, if we reach these numbers, everything would be hunky-dory. You might say we would be done. This definition of done is reaching all these critical things within 3 years at this level as measured by this scale. So this is language in a nutshell. I asked it for fun to tell me what % of all the stakeholders would be happy if we reached this. And we get some numbers here. Could do all kinds of interesting things there. Here's a little enlargement of that, but I think you can see it perfectly well. I got interested in asking how many quality requirements we should handle. I knew it was more than 1 or 2 or 3, and that quality wasn't just one dimension. And long story short, it says if you handle 15 of these quality requirements, you might potentially impact 85 to 90% of the stakeholders. Or put another way, if you handle as 15 or fewer, there will be 10 to 15% of the stakeholders who will not be happy bunnies, and your project might fail anyway. So that means as a general idea, you have to think about 20 quality requirements, and maybe you'll get pretty good coverage. If you don't, you'll hear from your stakeholders, hopefully before they fine you 800 billion pounds or something like that. But it's an interesting idea to have an order of magnitude. We're talking at least 15 for pretty good satisfaction. And here's a table I asked it to make up for me. Here's some more discussion. But if you're not aiming for order of magnitude 16 to 20 quality requirements quantified, your probability of failure and risk of failure is going up. Okay. Again, you can experiment with projects. We'll do some projects with only 6, and we'll see if they fail. And then we'll try some projects with 20 and see if they succeed. Have fun. Let's see. In product development, okay. I've got here a thing I call an impact estimation table, which I've invented, and it's a cornerstone of the engineering method I'm talking about, Agile engineering. At the top here, we have 3 different solution ideas, which are defined here. And on the side, we have 3 different values, which are defined or referred to here. They could be quantified. And in the middle, we have an estimate of the effectiveness of these. So the thing we can do with impact estimation tables is to look at multiple solutions simultaneously with multiple strategies, and maybe even look at some idea of summation of the effects. In other words, long story short, this engineering tool will allow you to handle 20 solutions and 20 values simultaneously at the design stage. Is it a good enough design? And with feedback at the, do all the measures come in as expected? Here's another version of the same thing, but in this case, I've taken the detail of 3 values using the planning language structure with scales of measure and goals. I've taken some more detail about some strategies, and to squeeze it into a slide here, I've just got 3 by 3. Normally, I would have at least 10 by 10 for beginners. And then I'll take the next 10 by 10 when I've done the 10 most critical things. Okay, but this will give you some idea of the impact estimation table. Then the next trick is when you get a strategy and somebody says, how long time will, or an architecture idea or design, and somebody says, how long time will that take? And somebody says 3 years for the national health system. And say, well, that's not going to happen on my watch. We will decompose it into, for example, weekly components, weekly steps. Each weekly step will give value. Now, even if you only get 2% value on every step, the first 50 weeks will give you all the way to the goal, 100%. That's not bad compared to many projects which are years late or fail totally. It means total success within 1 year. And with a bit of luck, if the steps you pick are high value, low cost, then the 80-20 rule will kick in. And after 20% of the project time, you will have 80% of the value. Think about that, okay? Here's a larger table that I mentioned, sort of 10 by 10. You can get AI tools to do estimates for you. You can do it manually, or you can get it done by AI tools and adjust it manually, all kinds of possibilities. But this gives you a possibility of an overview of a national health system with 10 strategies and 10 values and the intersection, because every strategy has multiple effects, whether we like it or not. It doesn't just have one effect on one value. And every value is potentially supported by multiple strategies. And this is engineering, and we just have to deal with it. Here's a little comment on constraints. Now, I have a free book on it called Theory of Guides I've written recently, very deep. This is a simplification diagram of it, that some constraints are binary and some constraints are variables, and we have to deal with all kinds of them. And, we have to accept and fall within certain constraints. Otherwise, well, we fail, okay? In Fred Brooks, who's more famous for his Mythical Man-Month book, he wrote a book I didn't even realize he'd written, even though I knew him quite well personally, but 2010, I think it was, The Design of Design. And he's got a whole chapter on constraints there. And there are very few who really dig into constraints and take them as seriously as they need to be taken. I've got a general theory of design that I wrote for my academic friends who like general theories of things. There's your free copy. Here's the quick summary of it. You have some functionality, which is what the system does. And then you have some qualities, which is how well it does them. This is symbolically just two of them. You have a goal to get this good and this good sooner or later in the qualities. Then you start designing. You bring in the best design you can think about and say, how good is that? And your impact estimation says it gives you 20%. Then you turn to your architect and say, can you do some architecture? Yeah, okay. Well, how good is your idea? Well, I'll give you another 20%. What does that mean? It means we've made some good progress incrementally, but we still lack 60% to get to our design level. So either we give up and take back our promises, as it were, say you're only going to get this much because our designers ain't no good, or you bring in better designers or motivate your designers more. I'll give you £1 million if you can figure out how to get to there. It'll save 100 million pounds a year in the National Health Service, so why not? Okay, but so long story short, I think this is a nice visual way of understanding what I mean by design. It is finding things that, when implemented, move us towards our value level goals in the long term on multiple dimensions. Strategy decomposition, when you have a strategy that's too big, if I ask a stupid AI system, please decompose it into weekly increments, it'll probably give you a series of tasks. But if you ask a simple question, will these tasks move the value ahead? Then The answer is no. You'll get the value when all the tasks are done, the 52 weekly increments. This is Big Bang waterfall, okay? In Agile, we have to instruct our people and our AI systems. No, you divide it up so that each sub-strategy delivers some value on each step. On the BCS training courses where we did this, I was usually able to teach anybody on the course the difference between task decomposition and value delivery step decomposition in about 1 hour. Almost everybody started off here with their conventions of, doing tasks. And, once I said, nope, that won't give you value. Do it again with value. They managed to pick up the idea, do it right away. Again, if you feel you don't know how to do that, ask your favorite AI system and it will do it for you. But then it is making you obsolete, isn't it? Okay. So I like sets of principles for everything. Here's one of them, and it's quite simple. A good design idea, like this one at 20%, might not be good enough to meet all your targets on time. So you have to expect a set of multiple designs to get ambitious targets. You don't need any designs to get unambitious targets, like just code the functionality and doesn't matter about its maintainability or usability or security. We'll take it as it is, which a lot of people practice. They don't have an idea of a quantified quality level, and they don't have an idea of designing to get there. They just code for the functionality and try to remove the bugs, and that's their culture. There's a thing called intelligent prioritization, and long story short, and there's a longer story here, prioritization should be based on value and resources, also known as efficiency. If you're talking to a top manager, you could say the word profit or something like that. Okay, let's see. And here's a slide on using the impact estimation table as a tool for prioritization, for finding out that this design utilizing weather forecast data had the highest score value to cost, and therefore we might like to prioritize it. This can be compared with prioritization methods like the Moscow method, which I'm sure you all know, and things like that. It's a method based on multiple values and multiple costs. I've just simplified to one of each here for the lecture. And it can be done on any spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet can compute your best option, what you ought to start with. And that's being done here. And the AI system will do the same for you. So prioritization principles, looking at one of them, the priority of a stakeholder is proportional to their power. That means power to buy, power to fine you, power to shut you down, power to audit you, and that kind of thing. But there are more. If you want to understand prioritization deeply, here is a set of principles to get you going. Now, let's see, I'm approaching the hour, which I'm going to shut up, and we agreed 60 minutes, and then, although we did start late, but all right. And then we'll do questions and answers. So you might like to think about questions. Here is things I'm going to skip over. One of the things that Fred Brooks wrote so nicely about, he's the great architect. He architected the IBM 360 in his time. And he said that the purpose of architecture is not to maximize values or maximize cost reductions or something like that. The purpose is to find reasonable balance amongst all stakeholders and their values. In other words, peace, brother, harmony. That's a very interesting idea that I don't hear. Looking at Roger Martin's strategization, and the title of his book is, to win. You got to beat somebody, win the war, kill them all. I don't know. That's American thinking. I like to think we Europeans are more interested in harmony rather than profitability, leading the good life. Anyway, so I wrote a whole book about it called Optima, which is a free book, a couple hundred pages on how do we manage to find the golden mean, the middle way where most everybody's pretty darn happy. Nobody is perfectly happy. Nothing is maximized, but more than good enough and much better than it ever was before when we were at war with each other. Another book which might interest you, I've talked about how much I value engineering, but I've got a book you can get for free called Cost Engineering. And I go into detail about something that has always enamored me. Engineers have a thing they call design to cost. In other words, they don't say, I wonder how much this will cost, and make a cost estimate. And this becomes the budget. They what they do is they design something that will give value initially, and they say, can we optimize the design to make that cheaper? Okay, can we find a cheaper design with the same powers of giving you the values you want? And that's called design to cost. It's very well known. You can look it up amongst managers. Advanced software engineers like IBM Federal Systems Division on space and military projects did a thing called the clean room methods. You'll find literature amongst my writings about that. The genius Harlan Mills had, for 10 years, every project was delivered with the specs, the benefits, on time, under budget. So he's in the Bent's 0.5%, and he's doing Agile. Every month for 50 months, they deliver value and they measure the value, like I've been talking about. They measure the costs, and if the values and costs deviate, they hand over to Bob, who I've met, their architect, and say, Bob, redesign it so you get better values and lower costs. I call that dynamic. In other words, every cycle. Dynamic design to cost and design to value. Anyway, if you're interested in something really advanced like that, with the professors I found don't even know how to teach at their IT and engineering courses, read the Cost Engineering book. Okay, think it's time to skip the rest of it with I have a section at the end from this other free book, which is really about 12 case studies I decided to write up to prove that these methods are in fact successful. So here we have case studies from Hewlett-Packard, who massively adopted the methods and did research on them and published it. Then we have experience, and then here's the research, for example, and more internal research. That's the EVO method. And there are several other clients like Boeing and Intel and Ericsson and things like that. My method isn't widespread because it's sort of been elitist in the sense that really large successful companies went out and found me and tried out the methods and verified that they work. And I didn't need to sell it to the masses, and I couldn't care less. I earned my living from the rich, successful companies who knew what a good method was a long time ago, 1985. And while most of the 99.5% that fail still haven't figured it out, but I'm hoping to get to some of you who will help the 99.5% failures. And here's one way of proving that the methods work. End of talk. I have a little thing I did on 3 previous talks. I think I won't demonstrate it here, but I've collected examples. Here's from Berlin of in 10 minutes demonstrating with perplexity all the things I've been talking about in 10 minutes. That's how fast you can do my method. Here's the San Francisco demo, etc. So you can look it up. And I'll leave it at that. Let's just say I'm actually done 1 minute before my time, even though we started a little bit late. But I do apologize for the density of ideas, but that's why I'm giving you the free books. That's why I'm giving you the um, um, slides. And that's why I'm very happy to entertain questions from you after the talk, tom@guild.com. Very simple. Love to hear from you anytime. I'm retired, so I'm free. Don't worry about me sending you a 1 million quid invoice, which it will be well worth, but I'm not going to send it. Okay. Ha. Anyway, but I have fun with that. Okay. I'm going to stop share and
that was wonderful. It really was. Thank you. And you've given us such a lot to think about. And I'm particularly interested in following through on those case studies. I think, is there any sort of questions or comments people would like to bring forward? Red, I notice you've been keeping track of and adding some a lot of links in to the various.
Thank you very much for the
The
presentation.
chat.
It was fantastic as always, and it's good to refresh. I've been in some of your courses here in London, and it's good to hear it again to refresh.
Yes. So thank you. It takes time. It took me 50 years to develop it, so it might take you 10 years to learn it, but that's okay. Take 1 year at a time.
Notice we've got one question here. How versatile is the method?
Yes. Well, we have proven and have the case studies that it works on almost everything you can imagine. So, number one, it works at the top level of strategic planning. This is a lecture Maria Flores in Business Change is interested in holding with BCS shortly in July. We talked about it. So I'll talk about that, but top level, long-term management planning. It works down at a very detailed level of planning an app for an iPhone or something like that. I'll call that a detailed level. It works on software, of course, but it works on hardware like airplanes from Boeing and electronics projects from Ericsson. Right now, I'm working with the Ukrainian government on projects to synchronize things like the photonics for Ukraine and Europe, and which go into drones. Okay. The Ukrainians came to me one day and they said, Tom, we need to organize ourselves better so we don't get slaughtered by the Russians too quickly. And we've organized ourselves, but we've discovered something. We aren't very good at talking about values, various values of everything we do. And we discovered you talk about values and you show how to quantify it. Please help. So I'm very actively, together with my son Kai, working with Ukrainians to do various things to help them articulate and plan the values for not getting defeated in the war and values for rebuilding Ukraine in time. Okay, that works for that too, everything. And they've got quite a wide variety. All the industries in the whole of Ukraine are involved here. So I don't know of any limitations. The limitation is if you have a trivial project in the sense of one person can code it in a week, you don't need it. Just do it. Throw it away if it doesn't work, right? And a lot of people have methods suited to that size and complexity. Okay. And yet they're trying to do the national health system in Britain. Okay. And everybody knows that there's a scale. Look at Margaret Ross's bridge in the back, where you don't let a good woodworker or carpenter do the bridge. You bring in architects and engineers, and they work very, very hard making that bridge so it won't fall down when the first car runs over it. And we haven't recognized that well enough in IT and at BCS. We haven't hardly breathed the word engineering yet in our training and courses. And it's time we change to BCE, British Society of IT Engineers or something like that. We've got to go to engineering because the projects we're doing demand it. And the failure in such large projects, health services, aviation control, industry, it's unacceptable that we keep on wasting so much money and time and things don't work time and time. 99.5% failure. Come on. Wake up.